Sarah, let's set a scene. It's October 23rd, 1942. Dawn is breaking over the desert in Egypt, near El Alamein.
I'm picturing it. This is the heart of the North African campaign.
Exactly. And inside the cramped hulls of their Carro Armato M1340 tanks, Italian crews from the Ariete Armored Division are making their final checks. They have 104 rounds for their 47mm guns and 4 machine guns ready to go.
There's a real sense of anticipation. They must have felt ready for a major battle.
They did. Nearly 280 Italian medium tanks are preparing for what will become the largest armored battle in North Africa's history. But they have no idea what's coming.
What do you mean?
They are about to witness something that will shatter every belief they have about their equipment. The Americans have arrived, and they've brought a tank that will make Italy's prized M1340 look completely obsolete.
This isn't just about a battle, is it? It's about a realization.
It's a revelation, one that will turn thousands of Italian soldiers from believers in propaganda into first-hand witnesses of America's industrial power.
So tell me about this Italian tank, the M13/40. What was its story?
Well, the story starts in 1937. The Italian Royal Army needed a new medium tank to replace their old L3 tankettes. The result was the Carro Armato M13/40. The name means it was a 13-ton tank planned for introduction in 1940.
And on paper, was it a good design?
It seemed formidable at the time. It had a 47mm gun in a fully rotating turret, which was a huge step up from its predecessor. The armor was up to 42mm on the turret front.
Who operated it?
A crew of 4. You had a driver, a machine gunner who also handled the radio, a commander who had to aim and fire the main gun, and a loader.
That sounds like a lot for the commander to handle.
It was, and that becomes a critical weakness. But at first, production ramped up. By late 1940, they were making 60 to 70 tanks a month. This tank and its variants would become the backbone of Italy's armored forces.
So, the Italian commanders genuinely believed they were entering an era of modern armored warfare.
They truly did. They felt their gun could handle British cruiser tanks, and their armor could stop the British 2-pounder guns. They felt ready. But they were about to learn that modern war is a race, and they were already behind.
So, when did these new tanks first see action in North Africa?
The first M1340s arrived in late 1940, but here's the first problem, Sarah. The crews received only about 25 days of tank training. That's a tiny fraction of what British or German crews received.
That's hardly enough time to learn how to drive, let alone fight effectively.
It was a recipe for disaster. Units were thrown together without cohesion, and critically, many of the first tanks didn't even have radios.
No radios. How do you coordinate a tank attack?
With hand signals, or by literally getting out of the tank. It was a massive tactical disadvantage. Their baptism by fire came in December 1940, during the British offensive called Operation Compass.
How did that go?
Horribly. At the Battle of Bardia in January 1941, the Australians attacked. In just 3 days, the Italians lost 40,000 men, mostly captured.
40,000?
Yes. Survivors reported total confusion. When artillery opened up, the tanks couldn't coordinate. They were just picked off one by one. The tank itself wasn't entirely to blame at this early stage. Its gun and armor were adequate for 1941. The real failure was in training, doctrine, and support.
That is a brutal start. But they didn't just give up, did they?
No, they didn't. By the time the German Afrika Korps arrived in April 1941, the Italians had learned some very hard lessons. Training improved significantly.
New tank training centers opened in Italy, and radios finally became standard equipment.
So the crews started to become more proficient.
Much more. They learned to work with the Germans, and they learned how to fight. This was proven at the First Battle of WWII in November 1941.
What happened there?
The Italian Ariete Division, using their M1340s, engaged British armor in a day-long battle. They held their own against the British Crusader tanks. It was a chaotic desert battle, with columns of smoke rising from burning vehicles on both sides.
So it was a more even fight?
It was. By the end of the day, the British withdrew, leaving behind over 40 destroyed Crusaders. The Italians lost 34 tanks. It was a tactical victory.
That's a huge turnaround from the disaster at Bardia.
It showed that with proper training and support, the Italian tankers could match their opponents. They continued to fight effectively during the Gazala battles in 1942, using speed and positioning to knock out Allied tanks. It was desperate, but it proved they had courage and skill.
But Mark, you mentioned earlier that they had already fallen behind. Even as the crews got better, the technology didn't stop, right?
That's the tragic part. Just as the crews mastered their tanks, the technological gap widened. In early 1942, the British deployed the new American-built M3 Grant tank.
How did that change the game?
The Grant had a 75mm gun. It completely outranged the Italian 47mm weapon. The Grant could destroy an M1340 from a distance where the Italian tank's shells were completely ineffective.
And this must have exposed all the M3040's other weaknesses.
Exactly. Its riveted construction was a death trap. Even if a shell didn't penetrate, the impact could shear the rivets off inside the tank, turning them into deadly projectiles.
You also mentioned the commander.
Yes, the two-man turret. The commander had to find targets, aim the gun, fire the gun, and command the tank all at once. It slowed reaction times terribly. Plus, the engine was underpowered, especially when crews piled on sandbags for extra protection.
So what did the Italians do? They must have known they had a firepower problem.
They did. Their best solution was a stopgap, the Semavente 75-18. This was a turretless assault gun that mounted a 75mm howitzer on the same M1340 chassis. It could fire a special shell that could penetrate Allied armor. But it wasn't a real tank, and there were never, ever enough of them. And that brings us back to October 1942 and the Second Battle of El Alamein. General Montgomery's British Eighth Army has spent months building up for a massive offensive.
This is the turning point of the Desert War.
It is. The British assembled over 1,000 tanks. This included new Crusaders with better guns and heavy Churchill infantry tanks. But they also brought something else, something the Italians had only heard rumors about.
The M4 Sherman.
The American M4 Sherman. 252 of them were operational for their combat debut.
And on the other side?
The Axis forces had about 540 tanks. More than half of that entire force, 278 tanks, were the Italian M1340s and M1441s. They were dug in behind extensive minefields, hundreds of thousands of mines called the Devil's Gardens.
The battle began with a legendary artillery barrage, right?
On the night of October 23rd, 900 Allied guns opened fire. It was a tempest of high explosives that lasted for hours. When it stopped, the infantry advanced, and on the second day, the tanks came.
What did the Italian crews see?
They saw shapes moving through the dust and smoke.
Then they got their first clear look at a Sherman. It was bigger than they expected. It was taller, and they could see the long barrel of its 75mm gun. It moved with a casual confidence, like a predator that knew its prey was outmatched.
Let's break that down, Mark. How bad was the mismatch, really?
It was catastrophic. The M4 Sherman represented everything the M1340 was not. The Italian tank weighed 14 tons. The Sherman weighed 31 tons.
More than double the weight. What about armor?
The Italian tank had 30 to 42 millimeters of flat, riveted armor. The Sherman had 51 to 64 millimeters of thick, sloped armor, which was far more effective at deflecting shells.
And the guns?
This is the key. The Sherman's 75mm gun could destroy an Italian tank from the front at any combat range. The Italian 47mm gun had almost no chance of penetrating the Sherman's frontal armor, except at point-blank range.
So, the Shermans could just sit back and pick them off.
And they did. The first engagements were over in minutes. American and British crews would halt at 1,500 meters, well outside the Italian gun's range, and just methodically destroy them.
And the riveted armor?
It was deadly. Shells that hit would pop the rivets, killing the crew inside even if the armor wasn't breached. The Italian crews fought with desperate courage, trying to get close, but the Shermans dictated every engagement. They were reduced to aiming for tracks, just trying to immobilize their opponents. It wasn't combat, it was survival.
The battle raged for nearly 2 weeks. What was the final toll?
It was a decisive Axis defeat. Montgomery's forces broke through. The Ariete and Littorio armored divisions fought desperate rear-guard actions, sacrificing themselves to cover the German withdrawal. Tank after tank was left burning in the desert.
How many of the Italian tanks survived?
Of the 278 Italian medium tanks that started the battle, fewer than 30 escaped. The Axis lost virtually their entire armored force. This was the beginning of the end in North Africa.
The retreat must have been grueling.
It was a long, desperate fight back across Libya and into Tunisia. By early 1943, the situation was hopeless. The Italian tanks were completely useless against the waves of Shermans and other new Allied tanks.
They had to rely on desperate tactics.
Exactly. Ambushes, night attacks, anything to close the distance. But tactics can't compensate for such a massive material inferiority. The end came in May 1943. The remaining Axis forces in Tunisia surrendered.
How many were captured?
About 250,000 German and Italian soldiers became prisoners. Among them were the survivors of Italy's armored units. They entered captivity with a mixture of relief that the fighting was over, and shame that their equipment had failed so completely. But their biggest revelation was yet to come.
Several thousand of these Italian prisoners were shipped to the United States. The journey itself was the first shock. They crossed the Atlantic on American Liberty ships.
The ships that were being mass-produced at an incredible rate.
Precisely. One of them, the SS Robert E. Peary, was launched after just 4.5 days of construction. The prisoners saw American sailors eating fresh meat, milk, and white bread. They were shocked at the waste. Sailors threw away food that would be a feast back in Italy.
And when they arrived in America,
They docked at naval bases like Norfolk, Virginia. They saw sprawling ports with dozens of ships being loaded by massive electric cranes. Everything was mechanized, operating 24 hours a day under bright lights.
this must have been a stark contrast to wartime Italy.
It was a different universe. They were put on passenger trains, not boxcars, and as they traveled inland, they pressed their faces to the windows.
Every small town blazed with electric lights. Factories ran night shifts, their parking lots full of workers' automobiles.
Workers owning cars.
That alone was a contradiction of all fascist propaganda. They passed factories larger than anything in Milan. Near Detroit, they saw Ford's Willow Run bomber plant, a single factory that at its peak produced a B-24 bomber every 63 minutes.
One factory?
One factory produced more aircraft in a month than all of Italy did in a year. The prisoners saw farms, processing plants, and supply depots. They didn't just see supply lines, they saw supply oceans. They realized shortage was impossible for America.
So, this daily evidence of American supremacy just broke down years of propaganda.
Completely. They had been told democracies were weak and inefficient. Everything they saw proved the opposite. They had been told workers needed to be exploited for military strength, yet they saw well-paid American union workers outproducing the entire Axis.
Let's look at the final numbers, the ones that really tell the tale.
Italy produced approximately 3,000 tanks based on the M1340 chassis during the entire war.
And the Sherman?
America produced over 49,000 Sherman tanks.
49,000.
At peak production, American factories delivered over 2,000 Shermans per month. That's more than Italy's entire annual output, every single month. The Italian tankers weren't just defeated by better tanks, they were defeated by an economic system.
So when these men finally returned to Italy after the war, they were changed.
They returned to a destroyed country, but they brought back valuable knowledge. They had seen how a democratic, industrial society functioned. They had witnessed prosperity without conquest.
They helped rebuild.
Yes, many historians argue the Italian economic miracle of the 1950s was built, in part, on the knowledge these men brought back. They became advocates for democracy because they had seen it work. They were stunned by the Sherman tank on the battlefield, but they were ultimately converted by what it represented, the overwhelming productive capacity of a free people.